Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, that's much better. Thank you. Welcome to the Leadership Forum. Today it's my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine. His name is Bill Murray. He's a commercial real estate broker, presently with Newmark and Grubb here in Salt Lake, and that's a national firm. And he's going to talk about careers and opportunities in commercial real estate. Bill was born and raised in a suburb of Chicago, and he played an extensive amount of baseball and was a prospect as a pitcher for professional baseball. He ended up going to the University of Montana, played baseball and got a degree, and started law school and worked and was in law school for a time at the University of Montana. And during the time he was in law school, he worked for the governor of Montana on implementing an executive reorganization committee. In career highlights, from 71 through 80, he originated and sold packages of residential loans in the secondary market for a Salt Lake City Savings and Loan Corporation. From 1980 through 1989, he was employed by First Interstate Bank as a senior vice president and chief lender for the bank. From 1990 through 1996, he was an executive vice president at Wallace Associates Consulting Group, specializing in liquidating failed assets and for the savings and loans and the RTC, which is the Resolution Trust Corporation. Then in 1996, I'm sorry. Yeah, he started HM Financing, and that's financing services, a financial consulting firm specializing in commercial loan placements, investor and bank consulting. HM Financial Services operated within the commercial real estate firm of Commerce CRG here in Salt Lake City until 2007. He's been a vice president of NAI West since 2007. NAI West formed an affiliation with Newmark Grubb, which is a national company based in New York City. And that just happened during the past week. So I think you're going to enjoy hearing about commercial real estate, how investing works, what to look for, as well as possible career opportunities that can help you decide what your career path will be. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Bill Murray.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and talk about that foreign industry that a lot of us don't probably deal with every day, and that's commercial real estate, both investment real estate and commercial and other types of properties. So I passed out a handout to start the discussion, but I want everybody to participate with questions. And you can ask any question you have about commercial real estate. It's a little different than the normal real estate. We call the people that work in residential, we call them home jockeys. So we don't like to associate ourselves that much with the residential. We have a special niche. We're not in the MLS system. We have our own intranet system of handling commercial real estate. So I think you'll find it fairly interesting to see what the inner workings are. And I've given a handout to you with guidelines, and so at any time, just ask questions that whatever you may have. But if anyone ever has it's a great field. You're your own boss. You're an entrepreneur in commercial real estate, but everything is dependent on you. So the barriers to entry have to do with your own personality, your discipline, your ability to communicate with people, your analytical skills, and it takes a period of time in the business until you can develop enough contacts and clients to be successful. So it's not an easy industry to enter. And on the first page of your handout, let's just go through these, because I think this will give you some idea of what is required. Most people that get in this business usually have liquid assets or the ability to meet their operating expenses for a period of 1 year. You don't want to enter this field with not having the ability to put away some money. The reason is it takes a long time to develop the client base, and then once you do have a transaction, it takes quite a period of time for that transaction to close. There's a buyer, there's a seller, there's a property, there's the due diligence period, including the valuation, inspections, phase 1 on environmental, and so on. So to get to closing takes a while for that first check. So you want to be sure that if you decide to become a broker in commercial real estate, that you put away enough liquid assets to carry you through for that first year. I can't stress this enough, you have to be self-confident. You have to be able to say that I know this property, I know this business, and I know how to communicate that to my client, and that the client will understand where I'm coming from, but I'm the knowledge source, and the client's going to have to look to me for answers. That's not an easy thing to do. You have to build self-confidence and get to the point where you can act independently with confidence with that client. As I mentioned before, the prospect to closing can be a long time. I did a private campus here, a middle school campus, and it took over a year for that to close. Now the commission on that was in excess of $400,000, and that was a number of years ago, but it took a considerable amount of time. So just remember to have, if you decide to get into this business and if it's attractive to you, if you like real estate, just be sure that you have the ability to cover your operating expenses. And it's a long process. It's difficult business to be successful. I'm talking about the barriers to entry. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy. It's not. It takes a while to. We have a lot of younger people in our firm that are just learning the business. And sometimes it's difficult. Usually they're called apprentices, and they team up with a senior member in the firm and learn, and then eventually go out on their own or stay with that person and then develop their own book of business. The skills required for this are also listed here on this page. You have to have an analytical mind. You have to be able to be comfortable with numbers. You have to be able to say, you know, what's the best thing I can do for this client? How can I reach his goals for him on returns from investment property and or just purchasing a property that he's going to buy and hold and not expect a return from it. So it does require analytics. People skills and patience. You have to have a lot of patience in this business. You're going to have clients that are not so nice. That doesn't mean they're not smart. That doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing. But it may mean that you're going to have to just exercise a lot of patience. And that's a skill that I think is undervalued in this business. You do have to have patience, and Rick knows that from real estate also. People skills are really important, both getting along with the people you work with in the office and also with your client, being able to relate to them and get a personal relationship with them so they feel comfortable with you. And once that happens, generally the transaction will be successful. So I think that's very, very important skill to gain. You want to make sure that you're giving your client the state-of-the-art in representation. And I know this is all kind of foreign to you right now, but in commercial real estate, there are so many competing brokers out there looking for the same clients. This community isn't that big where there are that many transactions that are available to everybody that's in the business. So you've got to develop the skills sufficient that the confidence of the client is in you and that the client feels comfortable that you can bring his goals to fruition. So you have to have a platform to operate from. By a platform, I mean once you're in a firm, you're going to need support people that do the mapping for you, do the flyers, the marketing flyers, that portray the property, that show, for example, a flyer that just went out yesterday is a good example that a new listing, 7450 South State Street. It's a single owner building. It's an owner occupied building, meaning that it is not an investment building. It's 14,700 square feet. We're asking $1.3 million for the building. And to get that exposure for the client for his property, we do a marketing flyer. That comes from our support people who put together a piece that explains everything you need to know about this particular property. And it has the square footage, it has what the comparable sales are around the market, and it is priced according to what has sold recently, the very similar building. So that this is $87.22 a foot, and most buildings today in the market of this type are offered at $100 a foot. So it's a little bit less money, and so it's attractive to a potential owner-occupant that wants to run his own business out of there. Anyway, does anybody have any questions so far? I know I've given you quite a bit. Judd, please feel free. Yes, sir.
Money reserve, how much would you say a number? What is that number?
Well, whatever your monthly outgo is for your... Oh, I'm sorry. The gentleman just asked what the number would be for the reserve for the setting aside money before you get in the business. That amount of money would be equal to your utilities, any mortgage you might have that you make payments on. For example, let's say your home mortgage payment is $800 a month, and let's say your utility bills are another $1,200 a month, whatever. That 2,000 times 12 is what you need, that I think you need. Now, a lot of people go into the business without doing that, but I would say you'd want to have that 24,000 set aside, because there's going to be a period of time where you don't receive a check, and so that's important. That's a good question. Any other questions? Okay. I'm down to, on this first page, talked about the art of the state of the art and representation, the platform. The next thing are spreadsheet skills. I use Excel, but Argus is another one that are built for real estate that show an investor. For example, if it's an investment property, the investor is going to want to know what his return is going to be over a number of years. So you do I don't know if you've gotten into the time value of money, but we do a present value analysis on a property whereby we figure out today if he buys this property and he puts down $500,000, what's that worth at the end of the period of time? Because there's a discounting, that you discount it forward. $1 today is worth more than $1 15 years down the road. So you do a discounted analysis and bring it back in, but that's maybe a little bit too complicated right now. But you need spreadsheet skills, and you can get that fairly easily. You just take a course in Excel or Argus and be able to apply that to an individual property. Yes, sir?
Yeah, in relation to the spreadsheets, you could do that daily, couldn't you?
Yes, and that's what a lot of us do. We have a template we've built for a particular property, and we review it based on the changes that may happen. For example, an apartment building, rents come in bunches, and before that sale's made, you want to be sure that you've analyzed all the income that's come in. Correct. And you just develop that on I would say if you did it, if you reviewed your spreadsheet once a month, you'd be doing really well.
So if you work in your spreadsheet, are you working on a 25%? Profit on that each time you do in order to cover all your costs, plus put money in the bank?
Oh, now are you talking about you personally? Excuse me. The question, I think this is the question.
Both questions are good.
Okay. Well, if you're talking personally, to having a personal spreadsheet for your own, to set aside money so you can get into this business, you can use Quicken, QuickBooks, or the spreadsheet I'm discussing has to do with commercial real estate. But yes, you should check that daily. That's a good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Is it better to get an empty facility and get somebody in it, or get a facility that's already got users inside of it?
That's a good question. What the question is it better to have to work on a property that is empty, or a property that has lease income off of it from tenants? Those are two different types of properties. Either one is good. Investment real estate, where you have tenants in there and it throws off, say, 9% a year net income, that's a different category than just a owner-user building that's blank. I'm in investment real estate, so most everything I work on has to do with investment returns to the buyer of the property. Excuse me. Get a little water here. But owner-occupied properties are also, that's a big area of the market also. Any other questions on that first page? Excuse me, I have allergies, so I have to take a break every once in a while. Okay, if we can go to the second page. What I've written down here are some things that make very successful people in this business. Now, there's several agents in town that have made in excess of $2 or $3 million last year. Excuse me. And the key to their success has to do with big goals, thinking big, reacting immediately in the marketplace so that the client they have thinks in a large way too. So you got to have big goals, and you have to think confidently that you can perform on those goals. And you want to, the other thing is your self-discipline, committing to daily planning. That is very important also. You want to create a list of emails, names of clients, determine the correspondence you want to have sent out, and ask yourself, what steps should I take to fulfill these big goals? Other steps. A lot of self-discipline. In our business, for each $300,000 in commissions, gross commissions that come into the office, you need about approximately one assistant for that. I have two, but it's important to have people that support you and can assist you. You assign duties to those assistants that are, you may be the interface with the client, and they do some of the analysis work. But it's important to know that it's a team concept and requires more than one person to be successful, I believe. Self-discipline, again, with time blocking your time out, write a schedule out in activities. That's, everybody knows that, but you need to do it probably once a week, and then test yourself whether you're making the calls that are needed, cold calls, other referral calls, people that you know, and try to block out maybe 2 hours a day for that type of work, and just constantly churn the market so that you're in the market talking to people that you know, or cold calling. All of these systems in place are for you personally. If you're going to be successful, it requires a lot of this self-discipline. And accountability is important. You're accountable to yourself and to your team. You don't want to lose sight of that. That's an important aspect of being successful in this business. Don't procrastinate. Always follow through. I think we lose a lot of good agents because they just don't follow through. Follow up with the client, maybe even every other day for a while. make sure they're copacetic, everything's going well, especially after they've made an offer on a building and you're going through the due diligence for them. And the due diligence is the appraisal, all the inspections, the phase 1 on the environmental. All these things need to be completed before the sale can take place and close. And cold calls, can't say enough about cold calls and the art of a telephone call. How you present yourself on the telephone is very important. Yes, sir.
Before we leave that page, talk about team concept. Do you have a generalized list of who you'd have on your team, like a tax attorney, lawyer?
The team concept I'm talking about is within your own office, where you'd have an assistant who would be preparing the flyer, for example, would be getting the map on the flyer. Those kinds of professionals are usually retained by your client as the buyer. He'll have an attorney that reviews the documents. He'll have a CPA that goes through his financials. It used to be that we didn't have those types of folks even on larger commercial deals, but today it's become so complex with the legal intricacies that usually those professionals are brought in by the buyer or the seller of that particular property.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you wouldn't have one for the intermediary on your own?
Our firm does have a lawyer in-house that when we have a problem or we get in trouble as an agent for doing, and the ethics are pretty tough in this business, you have to follow the ethics, he's there to protect us and to make sure that we don't lose a client or get in trouble with a client on a legal basis. And he's available, that's correct. In these houses, the kind that I work in, they have those resources internally. Any other questions on that second page at all? The next thing we're going to do is talk about formulas and numbers on commercial real estate. And I don't know if any of you have heard of capitalization rates. Is that a term that means anything to people here? Well, a cap rate is the short term for that, is the return that the investor expects in a building, as this gentleman was talking about, that's leased out. Let's say we have an office building that, I have one right now, it's about 40,000 feet, and it's about 15% vacant, okay? What we do is we take those leases, the lease income from those leases, and we spread those on a spreadsheet so that we know exactly how much income is coming in from that property. And what a capitalization rate is a measure of that income. It's the measure of the property's performance. How well is it doing in throwing off free cash? And it doesn't consider the mortgage debt. For example, in this particular building, there is no mortgage on it. But if there were, the cap rate really is based on a cash sale type transaction. So the investor says, am I going to get 8%, 11%, 10%? What's my return if I buy this building? And so the cap rate is divided, the NOI, which stands for net operating income. So if we take the gross leases and we take away from it, how much does it cost to get that income, including real estate taxes, insurance, the standard things that come with a building, all your expenses, janitorial, upkeep, snow removal, all those types of expenses are taken away from the gross income of the building, okay? What results from that is the net operating income. And you divide that figure by the sales price for a property, and it will tell you what your cap rate is. Okay, let me go over that again. So you have, let's say we have 600,000 coming in on leases in the building right now. And the expenses are 200,000 to run the building. To get that 600, you got to pay out 200. So you have a net operating income of 400,000. You divide that by a cap rate. The cap rates are determined by all the buildings in the market, similar type, very close and similar to the subject property, what they return to the investor. So there might be an 8% cap rate out there, 9%. They take all those numbers and they determine what the cap rate is for this particular building. And that'll give you the return that you should be getting from the building. It'll formulate your cap. Now, that's a little complicated. Does everybody understand that? I didn't explain that as well as I should. Yes, it gives you the value of the property also. So the investor will know, geez, I'm overpaying for this thing. They want 100 a foot, 4.5 million for the building, and yet when I put a cap rate to it, the valuation, that's correct, the valuation comes in at 3.5. Why am I paying this for the building when the value is 3.5 based on the income it throws off? So is that clear? Go ahead and ask me questions if anybody, yes.
One question is kind of a two-part question is that dealing cash, okay?
Right, cash purchase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cash is a very good wedge. So, for example, if a person buys a piece of property and intends to roll it over, you know, to get his money back out of it, and he has several other companies around him, I mean, does he use that immediate asset around there to regulate how much he wants to get a return in the property?
No, usually they just look at their own background and history and what they think this building should. Oh, yes, this gentleman's question was, does a purchaser of a building utilize the comparable sales and returns around this particular property? And the answer is that in a manner of speaking, yes, because an appraisal is completed on the building. If you make an offer on that building, you will make it subject to it appraising at that purchase price. So if it comes in less than that, your offer changes, okay? So you're right. From that standpoint, they take all the comparable sales in the area, they plug that into the appraisal, and they give you a number for this particular building. That is correct.
That helps you bring up a prospective sale for it.
Yeah, it does. It tells you whether or not your offer was in line with the value of the building. That's right. You're absolutely correct. And no offers have I ever seen, or very few, that are not made subject to an appraisal being completed. You have to get an appraisal. Yes, sir.
I want to make sure I understand this. And they say the only dumb question is one that's not asked.
Well, I didn't explain it that well, so you go ahead.
No, but I'm curious. Now, when you say commercial real estate, I know, now do you guys deal with buildings that's already built? Or can you guys go out and find a piece of land and say, and help your client say, we found a piece of land, say the guy want to buy a strip mall?
Yes, absolutely.
So you guys see that whole process through?
Yes, I've been talking about improved property, but, the question is do we help help buyers who want to purchase a raw piece of ground and maybe build, let's say, a restaurant on it? And yes, commercial real estate includes that type of property. We have people that specialize in land only. They know every piece of ground out there. They know the zoning. They know what type of property will work on that. There's a retail, which is a strip mall or a restaurant. You could build apartments. Yes, they do. They help with that. And that's a good question because raw land went way down in value in 08, 09 because you couldn't get financing to finance a new building on that land. But now prices have increased on land dramatically. And so we're seeing a real renaissance on raw ground. The problem is that the cities are really restrictive of what you can build on it. The zoning laws make it difficult to sometimes get the kind of use you want. For example, retail, they want that in a set spot, within their community. And so you've got to deal with that. But if it's zoned properly before you buy it, you might pay $10 a square foot for that ground. If it's zoned properly and it's good retail land, could go up to $20 a foot. For example, a restaurant, if you build a restaurant on a pad, we call them pads, you might pay $400,000 for that pad if you're in front of a Walmart, okay, on the corner. Because then you got, location is everything. Everybody, that's a true story. Location is very important. So your question is very good. Any other questions on that first number regarding cap rates? Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, over the years, I think it's in Moab area, I think they were scraping and rebuilding the area, taking all the tailings and everything out of there. Okay, well, how, did they sell that property at an enormous discount just to push it off, or how does it rejuvenate itself?
The question is revolving around the tailings at Moab and the removal of those tailings and what happens to that real estate. Frankly, that probably would never qualify for commercial real estate use unless, because I think, weren't those tailings very close to a body of water or?
Yes.
And see, that probably is in the county rather than in the city of Moab. I may be wrong about that, but the tailings wouldn't affect the use. In other words, they put a cap over that. Once they remove all of that, they bring in new fill and they cap it. A good example is in Midvale, where they've had those tailings problems. I don't know what's the name of that, Rick? A big site, but they put a cap over. They took all the tailings out. The EPA came in and spent $130 million, some enormous figure. Kennecott tailings, and took all that out, and then brought in brand new fill that was uncontaminated, and put a cap over the top, thinking that they could build residential housing on that. Well, that makes it problematic. A lot of people don't want to be near that, you know, and so they might be able to build a beautiful apartment project, all the amenities, and the rents may be $1,200 a month, whatever, but some people just don't want to live in that location. So you're right, it does affect the value of that ground. Correct.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
In the news lately, transporting oil underground and stuff like that. So when you buy property, they give you a sheet that says, you know, if there's any underground stuff.
The gentleman's asking a question: if you buy a piece of ground or make an offer on a piece of ground, and there's an oil line running underneath the property, would you be made aware of that? And the answer is yes. Title insurance is always acquired for any property you buy. So they'll give you a preliminary title report. It'll show all the easements for oil and gas. It'll show overhead power lines. It'll show all that kind of thing on that property. To be honest with you, oil lines are not a big deal. I mean, they do have breaks once in a while, but those lines are all 40, 50 years old too. You want to know about that, and you want to know where it is, because there's usually an easement to come on and work on that. And that could affect your building if it goes right through the middle of the property. But you will be, pardon me?
Pricing of the building?
Not necessarily the price of the building, but it may affect you from the standpoint that you can't build apartments on it. All you can do is put a parking lot. That, it affects you in the purchase. Yeah, you don't necessarily want to be building on, for example, one property I know about, electric power lines, big power lines running across the property. Well, some people who buy that, it doesn't bother them because the use will be some commercial use, but it could affect any other type of use, you know, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions at all before we just move on to the next formula here? How am I doing on time? I guess okay. You know, I took an accelerated credit course one time, and I'll never forget this. And it was tough. It was taking business problems and sorting them out on paper, and very difficult process. But I remember him saying that profits are wonderful, but cash flow pays the bills. So, you know, you have a lot of companies that are profitable, but maybe they're not generating enough cash flow to cover their nut each month. And that's a problem. So this next item, cash flow, what's your annual cash flow? And that is the NOI. Get familiar with that term. It's net operating income, okay? And to determine your cash flow, let's say you buy an apartment building that's $200,000 rents come in every month. And your expenses are $50,000. So you've got a net $150 in your pocket. Then from that, you've got a mortgage. Let's say your mortgage payment, now I'm just talking about your mortgage payment, is another $20,000 a year. So you want to know what your cash flow, net cash flow is. So from that 150, you take that 20 off and you're down to 130. Okay? That's your cash flow. That's what the building's throwing off. That's a very important item. Rick knows that too. Cash on cash return. If I put a down payment on a house, to simplify things, of $100,000, how long does it take me to get my $100,000 back on that if I were to sell that property later on? The cash on cash return is an analysis showing how long it takes for your down payment to come back to you, okay? Annual cash on cash return equals the annual cash flow, which we just talked about, divided by the down payment, okay? That will tell you how many years it will take to get that. So if you put down $100,000, how many years is it going to take me to get my 100 back? You know, and that'll determine it for you. And usually it goes out a few years, so. Any questions on that one? Does everybody know what debt service is? We call it debt service. It's a mortgage. So whatever your monthly mortgage times 12, that's your annual debt service. So if I buy a building that's $4 million, I get a loan, a 75% loan to value. So I'm putting 25% down, $1 million down. I borrow $3 million. That payment that you make on that $3 million times 12 is called debt service, okay? And that's subtracted from your net operating income. Okay? Everybody got that? I know this is a little too deep, but I'm sorry to do this to you guys a lot. Yes, sir.
Okay, years ago back, when I was young, when we went up to buy a car or something like that, a brand new one, they would, before it could be financeable, we had to put 1/3 of the cost of that vehicle down first before it could be financeable. Is that still a guideline?
Yes, yes, and even more so today. The question is, if you purchase something, what is the down payment required, whether it's an automobile or a home or a house or a commercial property? Lenders really took a beating in 08, 09, a lot of losses where they foreclosed not only on residential but commercial and took major losses. Yes, you have to have, they call that skin in the game, and skin in the game. And the reason they call it that is they want their borrower to have at least 25% down in cash, not borrowed from any other source, but in cash on his balance sheet, okay? Some commercial properties, 40%. It just depends on the type. But yes, that's very important. You're not going to receive, except for SBA. SBAs will go 90% of the appraised value of the property or the purchase price, whichever's less. But otherwise, yes, you got to have quite a down payment. And you want that for yourself because it lowers your debt service. So you're not struggling every month to make the payment because you put more cash down. So.
I'm going to show them how you make your money here.
Yes.
You've got a building, you said is 40,000 square feet that you've got listed.
Correct.
And that spins off annual NOI of what?
About $400,000 a year.
$100,000 a year NOI, okay. 40,000 square feet. And
$400 a year. And
400,000 NOI.
Right.
Okay. Now, what he talks about is getting when he talks about a cap rate, you're taking this NOI of 400,000, and if your cap rate is 10%, then you take the value of that building is going to be 0.1.
That's correct, right.
Okay. Now, Gordon,
Yes, sir.
take your calculator. Is it? Oh, whoops! It fell down. I'm sorry, Vern. Take your calculator and divide 400,000 by 0.1. Okay?
400,000 by what?
That's going to give you $4 million, I would think.
Right, that's
Okay.
correct. And that's how you determine
So-
value on the income property.
That's your value on your NOI is $4 million. Okay? I get enough zeros?
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
right.
So what we're saying is 40,000 square foot building, spinning off 400,000 in NOI on a 10% cap rate, the value is $4 million. Also, what Bill does is looks at that and said, what's the replacement cost?
That's right.
If you took it $100 a foot, that's going to coincide, isn't it? This is pretty easy for right
It
now.
is,
But
although the replacement cost is much higher than that these days, as
okay,
you know.
yeah,
you know,
but okay. But I'm just trying to keep this in the realm
Yes.
of sanity for us.
Right,
But so you've decided that that building is worth $4 million. Now, where Bill makes his money is he's going to find a buyer for this seller because the seller is his client. Now, his responsibility is to find someone who will pay $4 million. So he's going to look at a list of buyers, and they're going to analyze these numbers that he's talking about. They're going to carefully go over, with the help of Bill, the vacancy rate, all of these factors, to determine if it is worth $4 million.
that's right.
And then, if you can get a 75% loan, you're talking about a $3 million loan. So you've got to have $1 million in the game.
Skin in the game.
That's your skin in the game.
That's what we call the skin, huh?
That's your skin in the
Is
game,
money.
right?
Yeah,
Okay. Now I'm going to give you the pen,
yes, let me,
and you finish it up.
I will, okay.
Okay.
So Rick is absolutely right. That's how a cap rate works. Now, to determine value here, how do I know that this $4 million is really the right price? Well, the answer to that are these comparable sales that you mentioned earlier around the similar type buildings, similar size. Have they all recently sold? And you can only use buildings that have sold, not listed buildings, but buildings that have actually gone through a buyer and a seller, and we have a price. So we compare that $4 million offering price to those other comparable sales. And that's part of the decision that the buyer will make. He'll look at those also, and that'll be in an MAI appraiser, which means is made as instructed. No, not really. member of the Appraisal Institute. They are the highest level of appraisers available, and they'll charge probably $6,000 to do this appraisal. But the buyer, and that's a cost that the buyer bears. Seller doesn't pay for that, okay? That's to determine whether he's getting a good price for the building. So and one other thing I want to mention about cap rates, and the higher the cap rate, the lower the value of the building. Whoops. Left hand.
Take your calculator and put a .12 on there and see what your value comes out to be.
So if you're a buyer, you want to be buying this building, if you can get it at 11% on the cap rate, because it's an inverse relationship. So the higher the cap rates, the better it is for the buyer, okay? But the higher the cap rate, the less, what's the word I'm looking for? The less attractive it is to the seller to sell it. So I don't care if you get an 11%. I'm not selling the building for any less than $4 million. And you go, well, wait a minute. You know, the comps all show that this building's at an 11 cap rate, meaning that's the value of the building based on the analysis of income. And he'll say, tough, I want my $4 million for the building. If you don't want to pay it, that's fine. You can go someplace else. So cap rates are inverse. Capitalization rate is just a value of the building based on cash flow. Okay? Does that help?
One of the majors.
One of the majors, right. And Rick is right. The other two sources of value are the replacement cost, which today are running on a Class A office building are $170 a foot to build a new building with ground. We just completed one on North Temple. It was $170 a foot. Now, the other is what you had talked about, are comparable sales. So there's three approaches to value. I'm getting astray here, but there's the income approach, replacement cost, and comparable sales. Those are all formulated by the appraiser. He does all that work and gives you a number. And hopefully it comes in at $4 million.
Now, Bill, let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
If this building is in Salt Lake City,
Rick knows this building too. He knows which one this
okay?
is.
Now, if this building were in Long Beach, California, what would the value be?
It would be much higher. And you know why that's the fact? Now, Rick has asked why this building would be more expensive in a place like Long Beach. Well, there's several reasons, but the main one is the fact that the cost to replace down there is more expensive. You know, that's one item. But also, real estate in California sells at a much higher price than it does in our market because of the number of people you have in that area, the attractiveness of certain types of buildings there. But yes, it would sell for a higher price, and this building would sell for probably 5.5 or 6 in Long Beach. And that's a function of income is higher for the building. They would get higher rents. So if we're getting $16 a foot from our tenants, down there it might be $25 a foot or $30. So that raises the value of the building. Does that help everybody? I hope so. Yes.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
No, I do right now.
My uncle used to be in the realty business and so forth. And it seemed like to me that he had some sort of a heads up that would be coming up, like a section of land that's going to be developed. And how many people or how many residents, what kind of companies like Kmart or whatever and so forth. And he would go buy that section.
Very smart investor.
Yeah, and what he would do is that he would hold for a while until things started to push his way. Then he would start segmenting it out and selling it. So, is that really a true fact? Like, the state will give you some sort of an idea where the growth's going. I mean, you look at Utah, the growth's going every which way.
The question is in these outlying areas where you're anticipating where the growth is going to come, do you get a heads up from the state on where the new developments are going to be, and so you can go out there and buy at a lower price? And the answer to that is not really. I mean, you will know all the redevelopment areas, for example, in the city. That's all public and available. You will know from just your instincts where the growth is. For example, Lehigh, northern Utah County is hot as a pistol for commercial. But generally speaking, that's what happened in Arizona. They would buy tracts of desert, and that got them in trouble later on. Of course, they were buying it with no money down and hoping to flip it. And a lot of them were flipped to Middle Eastern countries too. But as it all turned out, that turned out to be a lot of foreclosures is what happened. The banks took a lot of losses in Arizona. So, yeah, he's just based that on his instincts that he knows where the growth's going to be, or he feels like he does. But he better be very careful because he's got to get the zoning. The zoning is very difficult, so he can buy raw ground out there that's agricultural, but getting that converted to retail ground to do a shopping center may never happen.
What about just plain subdivision residentials?
Residential's a whole different ballgame. That's the same thing, though. You see, there's been some problems. I won't say who the people are. And the question is about residential. Does this apply to residential? residential, for example, up in Newton's Corner above there in the canyons, Rick and I know an individual developer is having a heck of a time getting a road built in there because the environmental people don't want it. And so it just depends where it is. I'm not an expert on subdivision, residential subdivisions. I try to stay away from them.
Bad news.
Yeah, well, it's a very risky gamble. Any other questions on cap rates? Okay, wow. Well, I'll go through these rather fast now. Everybody knows what debt service is. That's just a mortgage. Everybody knows what cash flow is. Everybody knows what a cap rate is. That's how much do I expect to get return. It's like putting a CD in the bank. What am I going to get from this building in cash flow or in return? Net operating income we've talked about. Gross income, we've talked about what gross is, but I've given a definition here. Operating expenses, I've outlined some of the operating expenses, including taxes, insurance, utilities, management fees, payroll, landscaping, maintenance, and supplies. So if you get $300,000 off your building, you got to take those expenses away from it so that you know what your net cash flow is, okay? And that's our net operating income. And the last one is vacancy factor. There's a lot of buildings that have 10 to 20 to 30% vacancy. You have to be very careful about that because they're not producing any income for you. But a lot of investors will buy those buildings saying, I've got the ability to get that leased. I know how to market that building, get it filled up. So, if anybody has any questions, the last page is about the exit strategy. So if you get in one of these beauties, you buy an investment property, how do you get out? That's as important as getting in, more important. And I've just talked about disposition analysis. You can read those. I'm short on time, or am I not? But the exit strategy is really important. So you might buy and get a great cash flow, but all of a sudden you have some emergency, you want to sell the building, and it'll take you a while sometimes to sell it. So you want to kind of anticipate that. But when you're exiting the property, you want to just make sure that you give your client advice. Say, look, this is what we think we can get you in this building on the market. So we can get you 200 a foot instead of 100 on that $4 million building.
I'd just like the 4 million.
From personal experience, I can tell you that exit strategy is very critical.
Yes.
But why is this important to you? A couple of reasons. This is a great field of endeavor. People that do well at it do very well. It's an area that, based on the skills that you learn in business school, in finance courses and management courses, can help you analyze and become a successful salesman, a lot like Bill Murray. The thing that you want to consider in addition to that is, as I diversify my portfolio between stocks, bonds, and diversification, real estate is a very good diversifying tool for you as an investor. And there are a lot of ways as an investor to get into commercial property. Commercial property is more stable historically than residential property.
Correct.
It doesn't have the up and down fluctuations that are caused by incentive loan programs that highly overinflate residential real estate. It is much more consistent. But as we showed, and this is a very simple example, but it's a matter of having a very sharp pencil, if you will. In your world, that would be a very sophisticated calculator with a lot of investment programs on it to determine that value and what you would pay. If you are the buyer, you're not going to want to pay what the seller is offering. So you get someone that's very qualified to be the negotiator and bring the buyer and seller together.
That's correct.
So with those kinds of things, I hope you I hope you learned something today from Mr. Murray. I've learned a lot over the years, and I
So have I.
appreciate the relationship.
Well, I think it's a great industry. You have to be so committed to it and have this self-discipline to be successful. But a lot of, as Rick said, a lot of people make a lot of money in commercial real estate. And if you're between the buyer and the seller and you're representing the buyer and there's another agent representing the seller, that's our job, is to keep the two of them away from each other primarily and to negotiate the price in between.
So they don't
And
kill each other in the
Rick is a very
negotiating.
good negotiator like that too. So, but thank you for the time, and if you have any other questions, just let Rick know, and he can get me or whatever. But I've enjoyed this, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.